Start the morning right with a cup of Vinyl Tap. Nothing beats the refreshing taste of a hot, warm mug of Vinyl Tap. Enjoy your podcast in liquid form today. Vinyl Tap. Enjoy responsibly. 2, 1. Vinyl Tap. I'm Tim.
I'm Tim.
I'm Tim.
Brilliant. We just listened to Battleborn by The Killers. Fellas, general impressions to start us off.
You can go first.
Went straight back to the 80s. It's pretty good. Sorry, Jason, you go.
I was saying you could go. There was a lot of Eagles vibes in there as well from mine, like kind of 60s.
Yeah.
I think overall it was fairly consistent, and there were some really nice, good, shining moments, but there was also a fair bit in there that I can understand why I haven't heard most of these songs.
Right. I loved it. I love this album. It's just a good part of. It's a party for me. So thanks for tuning into Vinyl Tap.
We've been your hosts, and we'll see you next week. No, is there any place that you'd like to start with, Tim? Like, what about it? Do you like?
That's a very good question, because I was listening to this with a harmonic, I was thinking about harmony this time because that's kind of my job here. And I noticed that it's pretty simple harmonically, which isn't that surprising. Like, it's a rock band, and they're kind of poppy by rock standards, right? So, you're not going to expect, like, Yes or Rush levels of harmonic what the fuckery. But it's really simple, but it just carries me. Like, there's this Bruce Springsteen-esque not giving a fuck about chords, is what it sounds like to me. I don't know if that carries on to either of you, but I think harmony is just a pretty unimportant thing, like, academically to the Killers, and that they definitely seek more, rewarding experiences from melody or texture.
I'd probably disagree with texture. The things that they do change are definitely shining moments and, like, are amazing, but I feel like a lot of the time they do very similar things, and a lot of what generally carries them is, like, their tone color and their timbre.
I would say a lot of the harmony, I feel, the harmony was very simple throughout. Big things that I noticed that kind of carried it are those vocal textures. And it was, as Jason is saying, very timbral. So it was the big changes are the color of how the vocals are used, or the color of the synth, or that's all I have to add to that.
Right. Yeah, so harmony definitely isn't what's carrying this thing. I think we can all agree on that. Tone color, I'd probably seed is what's more important to them. I think structurally, tone color is really important, because the Killers, I've noticed in pretty much all of their songs that you've heard, they'll have, like, this kind of weird interlude right to the song, which we know as a bridge, but it breaks up everything, and, like, they use the bridge in, like, its intended purpose, right, to break up a song.
See, I think that they are almost cornering themselves into that a lot of the time, because in my couple of favorite songs on the album, they don't necessarily do that, or it doesn't stand out as much as they do that, because overall the song is not so thick and very much the same across the board. Like, my absolute favorite song on this album was Heart of a Girl, which has this gorgeous bass intro and had, just bass and vocals, and I think there was a little synth line in there. But it really, like, for that first part, was intimate and captivating and something different to what we'd heard across pretty much the rest of the album. And then when everything comes in, you've got the normal like Killer's thick sound with the synths and guitar and bass and everything happening, driving drums. And then like it kind of also builds across that. It then doesn't have this like, okay, we're all here, you know, we'll maybe take one or two things out and everything back, and therefore needs like a bridge that's sparse to give it space. Like it kind of already has that built into the structure that they've used and the instrumentation.
There is a section of that song after everything comes in where it definitely gets stripped back.
Yes, but it's not as like, oh, this is the thing that they've put here to give
Right, and that's
everything else
because
space.
it's the same melody, chords, like lyrical structure as the rest of the song. So it doesn't stand out as a separate section. So your attention is drawn more to the change of instrumentation, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so for me, when they do things like that, where they change their structure and their instrumentation, the songs like really shone through a lot more, and they weren't just like, this is nice, it's fine. Like, because there's only one song on here I really didn't like, but the rest I was like, oh, this is pretty nice. But I also at the same time understand why they're not cult classics like they had with Mr. Brightside that really like took over. Like they're nice and enjoyable, but unless you're a big Killers fan, I can't say that I'd probably put most of these on and listen to them over and over again.
Yeah,
I would fall on the matter.
No, I would sort of tend to agree with that. I think as the album kind of went on to that middle section, just as a side note, I actually pinned that "Heart of a Girl" would be your favorite song, Jason. Just the way that it was constructed, everything like you were saying. And up until that point, actually, I was finding there was less and less to sort of comment on because there were sort of the same features from song to song.
Yeah.
So, if you like that, that's great. But if you want something to give you a bit of variation, there was less and less sort of new stuff happening, or just different stuff happening between all the songs. There's like there's like this guitar line that in the second song, Runaways, it's kind of it's like a descending third. It's like da 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 da.
Yeah.
That motif appears literally from that point on in basically every song throughout the album. Just little things like that, which they kind of happen in the first couple of songs, and we're there for the entire thing.
Yeah, and it's cool to use through lines like that and leitmotif, but like you have to build it around changing like landmarks. You can't just have that as the signpost and have that continue forever and ever. It should be something that's like calling you back to a previous song, like and I'm pretty sure casual listeners would be like, "Oh, I've heard that line before. Where's that from?" And that's like kind of
right
building a thicker relationship with the album. But because like we can tell where it came from because we've sat down and analyzed it on purpose, we've kind of ruined that. So isn't analysis fun?
Yeah, I suppose so. It's yeah, I think a lot of it actually is quoting on when you bring up the Eagles. I actually hadn't made that connection, but that resonates so
me,
well.
It was just like the Eagles, if they had access to all these effects that weren't necessarily around or they didn't use. It's like very Eagles drenched in reverb and like just a very wet sound. And sometimes that's really cool, but other times there are moments like the very last song, Battleborn. I really wish like Brandon Flowers' vocals were more dry in that song. Like I really loved the guitar and everything else in there, but his vocals just kind of got lost in it a bit for me because they were so wet and understated. They weren't like dry and cutting through.
Yeah, I do agree with that. And I really, really love that song, and I agree with you. They definitely needs to cut more. It's too wet noodly.
And there's a lot of that throughout the album because there's a big emphasis on his voice for most of the album. And sometimes that Killer's wet sound on his voice like really works, especially in those like little intimate moments where it is his voice and one instrument. But the times where he's belting, it just doesn't work for me because it doesn't cut through. It gets lost, and the effect of belting kind of gets watered down because of the effects.
I love in Heart of a Girl, there's this one section where he just like leaps up and screams a verse, and like that's probably my favorite moment in that song. Maybe the album. I'll have to think about that in the coming minutes as you come to me with that question. But yeah, and I'm pretty sure that there it's drier than it had been throughout most of the album, and that's why it cuts through so much. Do you know what I'm talking about? That bit?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what I mean. They did little things like that across that song to change the texture and keep the interest without really having to like change the harmony. Because like you said, they keep that simple harmony across most things. But you've then got to keep the listener's interest with other things, and effects work and changes in tonality work. But if you do that for every song, then that's no longer like a point of difference either, because it's happening every single song. So, Beebs, what was your favorite on the album?
Actually, yeah, Battleborn was probably my favorite, and I think for a few reasons. It was it had really heavy drums in it, which kind of for me harkened back to what the Killers. That I haven't heard basically any of these songs. It reminded me of what I'm used to hearing for the Killers. And that heaviness, I think the point of contrast from the whole album, as well as just like it was so energetic and it felt very
Driving.
I don't know, quite different. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, driving is what I would have said.
Driving.
Like for me, I agree. Across the whole album, the drums were fairly understated, and the moments where they like stood out were the stronger songs, like Deadlines and Commitments, where you had that bass groove and the drums.
I love the breakdown of that song where it's like it's fucking cool.
And then Miss Atomic Bomb, is that the one? There was one that I thought was really, really cool. It's the chorus and Deadlines and Commitments. Like the drums needed, not necessarily the drums, but I felt like it was the drums needed something to just lift that chorus. I really, really loved the verse.
You mean like the bit where there's this tacit where it's like, I'm not talking about deadlines.
But then it comes back in at the exact same like level. Nothing lifts or change, and it built so well and then just didn't explode. Like I really felt like it was, you know, building up to slap me in the face, and then it kind of just gave me a gentle kiss on the cheek.
I kind of felt actually like Battleborn kind of hit where Deadlines and Commitments missed.
Yes,
because it had a really similar feel, and it had that same like kind of the big hits in the chorus and all that sort of. But I think Battleborn had this when the chorus came,
helped.
you know. Sorry, the
guitar tone.
A little bit, yeah.
As well as the drums were a bit bigger in the chorus from memory in Battleborn. Like they kind of stepped it up a bit. Everything stepped up a bit for the chorus. Whereas Deadlines and Commitments, they just kind of like didn't commit to it. Well, it's
definitely a more subdued song in nature in general. So like I would expect the drums to be like less hard on than they were in Battleborn. But I totally agree that if it did like rise up, it probably could have been the best song on the album. I've got an anecdote about that song and some others about the album in general. That song was actually pitched to them by the comedian Jimmy Carr.
Right? In what context?
They're actually good mates for some reason. Like they're just friends. Like Jimmy Carr's just like a good friend of the Killers. It's really weird. And after a show, they were like, "Hey Jimmy, what do you?" No, I think he came up to them and was like, "I reckon the next big song that's going to like conquer the world will be about economic hardships, because that's what the young generation is going to have to deal with." And like that's pretty good insight for an old comedian, right? But it didn't pan out, and no one knows this song.
I mean, if they'd up the chorus, maybe they would. Yeah,
maybe that's what's missing.
Because like literally, I was like, "This is awesome," and then I just kind of felt disappointed with the chorus and was like, "Well, I still like this song, but not as much as I really want to."
Yeah. I think the two main bits that actually got me and this is where I really noticed it was in Deadlines and Commitments. That wet sound comes from the delay that's being used on everything. Like there's a bit of reverb, but everything is drowning in delay. And so, yeah, it's kind of the overall effect I felt like was a introspective kind of feel. Because, yeah, it literally drowns in itself. Battleborn, I think another thing that was just different about that was when it needed to step up, it all dried up. And there wasn't that delay there particularly, which was, like all the tonal stuff like the synth, that kind of remained the same. The grunginess of the guitar, like how dirty they had the sound and stuff, that stayed the same. But when you get rid of the delay, the actual character of the whole song changes and steps up a little bit. And Miss Atomic Bomb as well, sort of, I actually felt like it lost a little bit of its, like it's cute, and it's sort of quite storytelly and nice, but again, there's so much space just filled by delay, by, that kind of, that you've just heard the line, now here it is again, softer.
See, I think that the Miss Atomic Bomb does a better job overall than Deadlines and Commitments. It's got like a slow build towards the chorus, and then like it's got a staggered entry. Although I wish it was more staggered, it was still something different as like an intro. And then again, the chorus stepped up from the verses, which it didn't in the previous song. And then the drums were also a bit more explosive. And also, I feel like that was one of the songs where Brandon's voice wasn't as like wet either, and it was a bit more reminiscent of their older sound in that song as well, vocally.
Right, that's interesting that you bring that up, because this song is actually the intended sequel to Mr. Brightside.
Yeah, so it just it feels like it has more of their older sound in it to me when I listen to that one.
Yeah.
Was that why there's a Mr. Brightside quote in the guitar?
Yes.
Right, because I picked that out. And I picked that out, and I literally wrote, "Hello, Mr. Brightside."
Yeah.
And it just sort of appeared right in the last.
It's a little cute that they did that.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, there's a little bit of harkening back to the like Brit synth pop like origins that the Killers like stormed the world with, but overall, as they progressed as a band, they went more American, right? They delved back into Americana with Eagles and Springsteen, stuff like that. So
there's also some big Guns N' Roses moment. There's like something in
Rising Tide had a bit of that shit.
Here With Me, the chord progression just reminds me of November Rain so much.
Yeah.
I can't think of the name of this song.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Jason, you go.
I was going to say, Tim, did you have a favorite on the album, or do you have a favorite?
Oh, it's tough. It's real tough for me. I love most of them. Battleborn, I think the end of the album is pretty stacked.
Yeah, I definitely felt that as they went on.
It opens with a couple of ballads that kind of start to get on you a little bit. It's like, all right, mate.
Yeah.
And then the bangers come a bit later.
Yeah, it does
like
get
it opens
stronger.
with Flesh and Bone, which I really like. Flesh and Bone's a great song. It falls just a little bit short because it opens with this really cool synth, like octave G's bomb. I'm not going to sing it, but it doesn't, like, the way it ends is really underwhelming, and I think it would be better if it ended with the same thing, like, to be like, oh my god, we've come full circle, or some shit like that. Anyway, I think my favorite song on the album, it's a toss-up between Battleborn and Be Still.
Yep.
Yeah. I just think that they're very solid songs that carry me all the way. I get entirely sold on the premise.
So, that's good. We've all spoken about what we like. There's something that hasn't come up in this discussion at all, song-wise. We've mentioned pretty much all of them, except for the one song that I absolutely just didn't get into at all, which was The Rising Tide.
Yeah.
So it starts off with a really cool intro that got me super excited for the song. And then when everything else just comes in, the intro is so unrelated and not necessary for everything else that goes on.
They are basically two separate songs. I've listened to this album a bunch of times, and every time I'm like, okay, it's the interlude now. This is the interlude between, what's the song before it?
Miss Atomic Bomb.
Before Miss Atomic Bomb and The Rising Tide. It's like a separate track.
Yeah.
It's completely irrelevant.
So irrelevant. And then also in the middle of the song, like, it was kind of, again, one of those, like, just typical, they're doing what they're doing. And then the thing that pushed me over the edge of saying, okay, I really dislike this song, is this guitar solo comes out of nowhere, and it just tonally doesn't match anything else that's going on either. Like, and I was just like, no, the
it's
drums
like
are
weirdly
understated,
sloppy and distorted. And it's like, this isn't
the
fitting
verse
in
and the
at all.
chorus. Like, it really irritated me because they got me excited and then was like, nope, this is unrelated. And then in the middle of it as well, they were like, here's this other unrelated thing over the top of what we're doing.
It's a big shame because compositionally, I really respect that song, and it's got some fucking sick lyrics in there as well. So, it's a shame that it could have been a good song, but it kind of falls short. Has some missed opportunities. It's a bit muddled.
Was there anything else? Oh, you go, babes.
Oh, I was just gonna say I feel like that's a little bit of a theme for me. Compositionally, this is really great as an album. And there's really like amazing just moments that you can pick out, like vocal harmonies are incredible throughout. The way that they use effects and the way that they invoke bits of the 60s, bits of the 80s, those kind of tonal sounds is like incredible. But they kind of, I don't know, they're just moments of the songs just don't quite hit the peak where they could go. And I think it's a bit of a shame because overall it's a good album, but I think there's it could have been really great with just a little, just a few tweaks here and there.
Yeah, in terms of an album, it's got a consistent sound across it. It feels like the songs, like, it matters what order they're in and that they're in this order for a reason. And, you know, visually the album art matches kind of the sound they've gone for. Like, it all lines up. But like you're saying, they just kind of fell a bit short of what they were going for, in my opinion. And in terms of us saying that we wish there was a bit more of their older sound on there, I think they sum it up themselves pretty well with a line from The Way It Was where they're like, can it be the way it was?
Well, after this, you know what they went on to do? I don't know if you'd say they went back to what they were doing, because you've heard The Man, you've heard Run for Cover, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
Stuff from Wonderful, Wonderful, which it goes in both directions, man. It's a very strange album, their next one, and it's 5 years down the line, so, you know, a lot of development's taken place. They've taken a long time to think about it. And Jason's told us his least favorite song on the album. What about you, Beebs? Same deal?
Look, no, yeah, The Rising Tide, I actually had really little to write because I was just in a bit of shock. I didn't quite know what to put there. Yeah, look, I would say The Rising Tide would be my least favorite. And it gets back to that thing of there wasn't a song where I was like, oh, I hate this. Like, even The Rising Tide, it was just the least impactful for me. Just really kind of, the elements didn't work. I didn't really feel anything at all. So that's it. And I think I did get a little bit lost sort of at around that point. Miss Atomic Bomb, The Rising Tide, those two songs kind of just as an album, I'd started to lose interest because it sort of started with ballads, moved into ballads, and then finally I sort of, started to get a bit energized moving on from there.
Yeah. We don't really talk about track listing too much, but maybe we should, because I feel like this album could have been improved without even changing any of the songs, just swapping the order of them a little bit.
We do talk about that sometimes.
Yeah.
Like I said, I feel like they've put these songs in this order for this. Like there's kind of a story going on, and you know it's because it's very unusual to have title track be the last track of an album.
Yeah,
That's
it's cool though. It's really
Yeah.
cool.
So there's definitely been thought put into it.
Yeah.
And I don't think that the order would be an issue if the songs kind of lived up to their potential. Like, I think it would just be like, oh, hell yeah, this is very exciting. But I can say what you mean. If you couldn't improve the songs, changing them around probably would improve listening across the album.
Yeah, like pace up those ballads a little bit, shove something in between them to, you know, keep Beeps' interest a little longer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Does anyone
my
have
short
any...
attention span.
Yeah, short punk attention span.
Yeah, that's it.
Does anyone have any final thoughts on this one, or any final comments that we haven't mentioned?
Oh, I just wanted to mention a bit of context for the album is that Battleborn...
Actually, just before you hit that, I'm just gonna, because it might be relevant, it might not be. I reckon they wrote Battleborn first, and then they were like, let's do an 80s album.
I wouldn't know. I don't know what order they wrote these in. I try to know a lot about this album, but I don't know that much. Battleborn is the state motto of Nevada, which is, of course, where the Killers are from. They're a very Nevada band. Like, Las Vegas is a big part of like their identity as a band. And so I feel like the album is kind of about Nevada. Like, what are you made of? Flesh and bone. Up against the wall. You know, you're Battleborn. Don't forget what you're made of. And shit like that.
Right.
Yeah, it is that very American dream.
Yes.
Like, not American dream, but like that idolized West kind of sound and image.
Totally.
Right, and then that would put into context a lot of the lyrics. They kind of evoke, you know, sitting in the car, making out at make-out point or whatever.
That's so 60s, man.
Yeah, that suddenly
like,
makes a lot of sense now.
Very Eagles.
Yeah.
Click above to find out what else we've talked about in this theme.
Click above to see other things